Thursday, explosions crippled two oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman, raising alarms about immediate security and potential military conflict in a vital passageway for a third of the world's petroleum. The oil tankers belong to Norway and Japan. The owner of the Japanese company that the ship belonged to responded to the claims by US about the Iranian involvement. By Thursday afternoon, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that American intelligence agencies had concluded Tehran was behind the disabling of both ships.
It is the assessment of the United States government that the Islamic Republic of Iran is responsible for the attacks that occurred in the Gulf of Oman today. This assessment is based on intelligence, the weapons used, the level of expertise needed to execute the operation, recent similar Iranian attacks on shipping, and the fact that no proxy group operating in the area has the resources and proficiency to act with such a high degree of sophistication.
U.S. Central Command said in a statement that the Japanese oil tanker Kokuka Courageous had an unexploded limpet mine on their hull following an initial explosion. The Japanese owner of one of the attacked oil tankers said the vessel was struck by a projectile and not by a mine. President Donald Trump on Friday said if Iran were to block the Strait of Hormuz, it is not going to be closed for long, but did not elaborate on what potential steps the U.S. would take in response. They are going to be closing the strait, Trump reiterated during an interview. Earlier this year, Iran threatened to close the strait in response to a U.S. decision to end waivers on reimposed sanctions for companies that export oil from Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most important oil choke point. It is a gateway for almost a third of all seaborne crude oil. America's top diplomat, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, blamed Iran for Thursday's attacks without citing specific evidence as to why Tehran was responsible. However, U.S. authorities later produced a video clip that allegedly showed Iran's involvement in the attack. U.S. online media outlets are also blaming the U.S. government and Secretary of State for allegedly falsifying evidence in this manner.
The owner of that tanker, Japanese business owner by the name of Yukaka Katata, came out and said, not in as harsh of words as I'm about to use, but this is the gist of what he said, the U.S. is lying about this. First of all, the video they showed was actually in reverse. They weren't putting the mine on the ship. Those were the rescuers removing it so that it didn't explode and cause further damage. Second of all, the area where Mike Pompeo said the ship was struck, it was actually the opposite side, and it came from the air, not from the sea. So basically, Mr. Katata comes out and says, hey, everything Mike Pompeo and the United States is saying right now that Iran allegedly did to my ship, it's not true. They're lying. And what's great about this, though, everybody knew Pompeo was lying about this prior to Mr. Katata coming out and telling us this. I mean, Iran is the one that sent their military out there to rescue these sailors. And believe the fact that these war-hungry psychopaths in the Trump administration, Pompeo, Bolton, and the rest of them, that they're trying to once again phony up information so they can start another unwinnable and endless Middle Eastern war with Iran.
The United States has a long history of intervening in the internal affairs of foreign countries. The U.S. intervened in the Israel-Palestinian conflict and to date continues to support Israel with billions of dollars in aid and reliable diplomatic backing. Since the appointment of President Trump, the issue has only escalated. After September 11, 2001 attacks under President George W. Bush, the U.S. and NATO intervened to depose the Taliban government in the Afghan war. Afghanistan remains under military occupation while the Iraq war officially ended on 15th December 2011. In 2003, the US and a multinational coalition invaded Iraq to depose Saddam. Before and during the Iraq war, Ronald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense at the time, claimed that Iraq had an active weapons of mass destruction program. No stockpiles were ever found. Colin Powell, the Secretary of State at the time, in a press statement on the 24th of February 2001 said that sanctions against Iraq had prevented the development of any weapons of mass destruction by Saddam Hussein. Powell came under fire for his role in building the case for the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair in 2015 had apologized for the war in Iraq. The US intervened in the 2011 Libyan civil war by providing air power. In August 2014, the US began airstrikes against ISIS in Iraq in response to gains by the terrorist group that threatened American assets and Iraqi government forces. In March 2015, President Obama declared that he had authorized U.S. forces to provide logistical and intelligence support to the Saudis in their military intervention in Yemen. It is quite evident that many of these countries are still reeling from the negative effects of these interventions. In an eyebrow-raising interview, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told Fox Business that American military intervention in Venezuela remains possible, a move that could violate international treaties and plunge the US into another protracted conflict like Iraq or Afghanistan. When observing international examples such as this, it is clear that any country that would not place itself in line with US interests would see sanctions being imposed and, in worst case scenarios, military intervention. Is this the fate that would befall our motherland as well? Religious leaders, including the Mahanayaka Theras, have spoken against US intervention in Sri Lanka that brings with it a mixture of military affairs and economic blackmail. Shouldn't global powers be ashamed to exert pressure on democracies which are more than capable of resolving their own issues?